We started it last semester, but it's a semester-long program designed to promote a structured research environment for undergrad students. And tonight we'll have 6 teams showcase what they've developed throughout this semester. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly introduce myself, our team, faculty advisors, graduate advisors, and our judges. So I'm Ryan. I manage the research team. And then moving on to our research leads. So every one of them has been working very hard to make the best possible experience for the participants since this past winter break, actually. And I want to thank them all for their hard work that they've put in. They've done an incredible job leading their team. So we have Aditya leading the portfolio comparison team, Bryant leading the COVID-19 genetic analysis team. Next up, we have Abby leading the historical text mining team, Vishwa leading the music generation team. We have Eric leading the temporal LiDAR team, and Sunny leading the VR user behavior analysis team. So everyone, let's give them some claps. Woo! Okay. So next up, I want to introduce our faculty advisors who have volunteered their time outside of work to help our team succeed and learn more about research. Firstly, thank you so much to all of our faculty advisors this semester who helped out. These exceptional projects would not have been possible without the guidance and support from all of you. So first, we have Dr. Gupta helping advise for the portfolio comparison team, Dr. Cheetah as the advisor for the COVID-19 genetic analysis team. And then we have Dr. Mazidi advising for the historical text mining extraction team, and Dr. DeGroat helping advise for the music generation team. For the temporal LiDAR team, we have Dr. Rosie as their advisor. And last but not least, we have Dr. Prakash advising for the VR user behavior analysis team. Dr. Prakash actually was an advisor for the VR viewport analysis team last semester, and we're very thankful to have him again this semester. But that's all the faculty advisors. Again, thank you, a huge thank you to all of you for helping. So let's give them a bigger clap. Woo! Awesome. Okay. So moving on, this semester actually we created a new position called a graduate advisor. Now, similar to the faculty advisors, they're there to help advise their team. So for this semester, we only have one graduate advisor this semester, and Brian was a previous research lead last semester. He is now a CS graduate student here at UTD, helping advise for the historical text mining team. So thank you, Brian, for taking the time to help your team. Woo! Okay, now we're going to be introducing this semester's ACM Research Symposium judges. So first, we have Professor Cole, who is a senior lecturer at UTD and the faculty sponsor for ACM. He has supported ACM for many years, and we're very grateful to have him here tonight. Next up, we have Dr. Dursingham, who is the Louis Beatrill Distinguished Professor of Computer Science. Dr. Dursingham is also the founding executive director of the Cybersecurity Research and Education Institute, and she's also one of the leading experts in data security and data mining. Last but not least, our third judge for tonight is Sid Devik. Sid Devik was the previous president of ACM UTD. Sid is actually going to be an incoming CS PhD student and National Defense Science and Engineering Graduate Fellow at the University of Southern California. But he studied CS and math at UTD, and he's currently interested in fairness and machine learning theory. So thank you, judges, for volunteering to help out tonight. I hope you all enjoyed tonight's symposium. Woo! Okay. We're going to get started with presentations. Audience members, don't forget to cheer on your friends or family members in the chat. So everyone, please give it up for the VR user behavior analysis team. Woo!
We also wanted to clap and cheer everyone.
Clap. And please mute yourself if you are not presenting. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. We are the VR user behavior analysis team. My name is Varun Sakand.
My name is Ryan Aspenleiter.
My name is Shreyan Roy.
And my name is Rishi Villa. And I would also like to give a special thanks to our faculty advisor, Dr. Prakash, for making this possible. 360-degree videos have been rising in popularity due to their ability to provide the user with an immersive experience while viewing a film. As you guys can see in the graphic to the left, streaming virtual reality videos in high resolution, like 4K, requires a lot of bandwidth, and the average consumer does not have access to speeds of such magnitude, so it is simply not feasible at the moment. The hypothesis that we arrived on was based on a previous set of data that included virtual reality videos with viewport information and user traces. If we discard areas from the frame that are not seen by the user and compress remaining areas based on relative values of importance, viewers will notice a negligible loss of quality of experience while significantly reducing file size.
In the beginning, we set out to understand the problem, study the work of last semester's team, which worked on this, as well as creating some grid-based heat maps. We later worked on creating gradient heat maps as an improvement. We then developed voting functions to further improve our gradient heat maps. We then transferred those into resolution maps and then used those to compress videos. We then defined metrics to evaluate how successful our methods have been. And lastly, we developed a machine learning proof of concept model to predict heat maps.
The initial approach for the solution to this problem was to adaptively render each frame such that we only fully render what is being actively looked at. Our process included developing an individual heat map that defined a single user's viewport and then stacking those viewport-sized ellipses of varying heat for each user's center of vision to get a holistic heat map. These holistic heat maps were then used to compress the image frames in order to have a minimal impact on user experience. As you guys can see, the image on the left is the original frame, and the image on the right shows how the frame looks after it has been compressed based on the holistic heat maps that were generated to mark popular areas.
At first, our team took the user data from viewports, and based on the coordinates, we generated a heat map that was grid-based and very general. It was simply based on how popular each section of the image was. However, this was then changed with a gradient heat map, which was more specific and complex because we assumed that since one is not directly staring in all directions, one's field of vision would decrease outward. As discussed previously, focus decays along the field of vision. And as a result, we then modeled 4 voting or decay functions, which are linear, semicircle, square root, and parabolic functions. One concept to note is that when the heat maps were combined, there were various intersections. And if there is an intersection in the elliptical shapes where the percentage of the field of view is both greater than 50%, then its heat would be greater than the center. And as a result, this represents the popularity better. Additionally, since we assumed the voting functions, it is best to consult with a biology expert to generate a more optimized voting function. As one can see, these are the voting functions that we decided upon, which are linear, semicircle, square root, and parabolic. And these were then converted to heat maps. One concept when comparing, for example, one concept to note is when comparing the linear and square root heat maps, the square root function's heat map has a faster and non-constant decay rate from its center, which decreases as it approaches the border. This is in contrast to the linear function's decay rate, which is constant. Additionally, we decided not to use the square root or parabolic functions because its values were too extreme. Once we created the resolution map, we noticed these differences a lot better.
Speaking of resolution maps, At this point, we had continuous values for our heat maps throughout the frame. However, it was time to turn them into something that we could actually use to compress our images. To do this, we rounded the continuous values into discrete compression levels. This was done with a few assumptions, the main one being that the user can only focus on the central 80% of their field of view, their viewport. Now, what this implies is that we can now have a heat threshold, saying that anything below 20% maximum heat in the maximum heat in the frame is not as important, whereas anything above that we consider as highly important. Now, this implied 3 levels of compression. First, we had a value of 0 if there was no heat, which implied that nobody was looking. We had a value of 1 if the heat was below the heat threshold, if it wasn't as important. And we had a value of 2 if we decided the area should be fully rendered because the heat was above the heat threshold. Now we have resolution maps. We know what sections we want to be compressed and how we want to compress them. It was time to actually do the compression. This was done with a 4-step process. First, we overlay the resolution map on top of the frame and determine zones of differing values. We then split the image into different sub-images based on those differing values. And then we compress each of those sub-images separately. As you can see, areas of value 0 are now completely black. Areas of value 1 are heavily compressed. Areas of value 2 are left untouched. Finally, we take these split images and stack them on top of each other and merge them into one compressed frame. And this is how we created our compressed videos.
Now, just to clarify, this is how the program workflow begins. We take a frame from a video. Then from there, we use viewport data as well as the frame itself to create a heat map that represents that frame. We then round that heat map to create a resolution map. And lastly, we use that resolution map to compress the original frame, which we can then insert into a compressed video.
At this point in our project, we had a working program that could take an image and compress it based off of where people were looking within a frame. However, it was now time to determine how good our approach was, and specifically how good each voting function was at accomplishing this task. To do that, we developed a few statistics. The 2 main ones being storage space saved and the user experience rating. Now, storage space is an easy statistic to calculate. You just take the file size of the compressed image and compare it to the original. However, user experience is a little trickier to explain. When defining it, we have to answer the question, what can the user realistically focus on? This is where we came into our heat threshold definition of that 80% of their central field of view as being of high focus. Now, we can take our compressed image full of good and badly resolved, or well and badly resolved content, and ask how much of that central 80% view, which should be ideally all fully rendered, how much of it is actually fully rendered? And we recorded this as a percentage, basically how much good content can the user see? And this was our user experience rating. Here's our statistics in action. This is for video 23. As you can see in the graph, top line being the user experience and the bottom line being storage. When you look at the averages across this video, we see a user experience rating of nearly 80%, which means that the vast majority of what they're able to see and what they're focusing on is well resolved. In exchange for the small decrease from 100%, we can cut the storage space by almost 2/3, which is highly valuable. When extending this to all 6 videos, we see the user experience rating doesn't really change all that much, still staying about 75%. While the storage space does jump up to 44%, that still means that we're saving over half of the video size in exchange for a negligible loss in user quality.
Now, the problem with all the methods that we've used so far is that they require a lot of user data to really be effective. But machine learning can be used to compensate for this. We can train a model with frame data as well as simplified heat maps from the smaller pool that we do have, and then train, and we can predict simplified heat maps based on given features within a certain frame. If this approach happens to be reasonably accurate, we have a nice proof of concept to show that machine learning can be used in this way. Now, although the model we use isn't perfect, it still shows a level of accuracy high enough to show that machine learning is a viable option in the future. Now, there's a lot of ways to take this project in the future. One of which is, as I previously mentioned, machine learning. We can further machine learning by using machine learning in place of larger amounts of user data. We can also use facial recognition and computer vision algorithms to further improve our model. We can also identify groups of users which behave similarly in order to classify how a user might look, or where a user might look without even them continuing to look in all the spaces. We can also account for auditory influences. So for instance, if someone hears something to the left of them, they are very likely to look in that direction in the near future. And lastly, as mentioned before, we can collaborate with optometrists to improve decay functions so that they have more of a biological basis.
Here are references for anyone interested. And again, special thanks to Dr. Prakash, our research advisor, and Sunny Guan, our team lead. If there are any questions at this point, we'll be happy to take them.
Yeah, so I'll open it up. So just a quick question: do you guys enforce like contiguous heat regions? So right, you have like 3 levels of resolution. Could it be that one pixel has a much higher resolution, so you don't compress it, but it's sort of like an outlier? Yeah. So this image on the bottom right is what I was trying to reference. So here, like, does the region 2 always have to be contiguous, or does it not have to be?
No, this is in fact just one example of our resolution maps. We have a lot of resolution maps where we have specific clusters in completely different spaces that are being looked at. It just happened in this scenario that areas above 20% heat value are like just happened in a line. But we do have frames where everyone's looking in one of 2 places that are completely separate from one another, and then we render it accordingly.
Okay, so do you think that they should be contiguous?
Do I think? I don't think so. So the way that we defined our heat maps is that the ellipses themselves that are used are viewport size. They have meaning behind them. When we say viewport, that means that is all the user can see. In that regard, if we have a viewport size ellipse that we're rendering at full resolution, then anyone looking there wouldn't be able to see anything else but that fully resolved content. That is a basis for this. So having that intermediate area be fully resolved when there isn't a significant amount of people looking at it would just increase storage space without much gain in user experience. If that makes any sense, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for answering my question.
No problem.
Okay, then to follow up, so are you using eye tracking to determine where people are looking, or are you kind of guessing or analyzing where people are likely to be looking? And is this compressing the image beforehand, or are you compressing it on the fly based on where people are actually looking?
That's a really good question. So as of now, our eye tracking, when we conducted the research and got the data, we didn't have eye tracking technology with the VR headsets. It was well out of our price range to do so. They're a lot more accessible nowadays, but obviously with COVID around, we couldn't regain any of that data. However, that is an area we would like to look at in the future, which is now being extra specific. We're not just looking at where the viewport is centered, because that's what we're doing right now. We can see where their viewport center is located, and then therefore determine what they can see. However, if we did have data based off of where people were looking within their viewport, it would make this model much more accurate. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. What was your second question? I just want to make sure I'm getting it right.
No, that's really what I was asking.
Okay.
So that's good. Thank you.
No problems.
Okay, that is all the time we have questions for now. Thank you, VR user behavior analysis team. Ooh. Okay, moving on, we have the music generation team.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Daniel, and my teammates are Kailash, Kirti, and Nick. Our research lead this semester was Viswa, and our faculty advisor was Dr. DeGroat. Big thanks to Dr. DeGroat as well. Yeah, and so this semester we worked on generating music using LSTM neural networks. And so just a little bit about why an LSTM network should be suited for music generation. Music is a very repetitious art form, right? We see melodies come up often, harmonic progressions come back. And so something that is able to remember these melodies, remember these chord changes, and then bring them up into a new context that would be quite great for music generation, right? And so LSTM, which is short for long short-term memory, is very good at remembering things. So a long short-term memory network should be able to do good in music generation, which is a repetitious art form. And then moving on to, what we how we input, information into our network. We take MIDI files, and a MIDI file is, just a binary file that holds information on note pitch and duration. And so it doesn't hold sound information. It just particularly holds, how to play the note and when to play the note. And so, yeah, now we can delve right into what kind of problem we are seeing here. And so prior research in LSTM music generation is very focused on classical music. One artist that you see come up a lot is Bach, and Bach particularly because of his rule-based approach to composing. And so, he follows these standard rules and harmonic progressions. And so it's quite great for music, repetitive LSTM music generation. But instead, we decided to tackle this problem, and that is which LSTM architectures are best suited for more modern music genres. And looking at our data sets, we have 4 data sets total. 2 of them we treated as controls for this experiment, and that is our Chopin mazurkas and assorted Schumann pieces. And these are both just, classical piano. Specifically, a mazurka is a type of dance music, similar to a waltz in nature. And then our 2 modern music genres, we have anime soundtracks, which are just a type of pop music. And the reason we specifically chose anime was because of plentiful data sets online. And then jazz, which is a more intricate form of music. And so it should be interesting to see something simple like pop music versus something a little more intricate like jazz. And so we took about like 14,000 notes from each of these data sets. And you can see how our categories or unique notes came from these data sets. And before we get into too much, I'll pass it over to Kailash to talk a little bit about our pre-processing.
Right. So like Daniel said, we had about 14,000 notes in our input to our model, and to pre-process it, we traverse the music in a linear fashion. And in each time step, we read in the note that's in the treble and bass clef. As you can see in the third box, if there's no note in the top and bottom clef, we just read the bottom clef and fill in any unknowns with zeros. In the next slide, you can see an example of how we map our input into a tuple that's easily understood by a computer. So if we had a major chord in the treble clef and an E in the bass clef with different durations, we save the information into a 4 tuple where the first and third indices are the pitch, and which are mapped to a specific integer, and the rest of the values are mapped to the length of that note. And the reason we do this is to collect a bunch of tuples that occur across the 14,000 notes that are in our data set, and we one-hot encode them to create categories that become the inputs to our LSTM model.
So here we have the 4 architectures we used in our model. So as you can see, some have different number of LSTM layers and some have additional layers like attention and bidirectional. However, the 3 things we kept the same across all the architectures were the activation, loss, and optimizer. So we chose these 3 specific parameters because through our past trial runs, we saw that these 3 parameters gave us the best results in our music in terms of accuracy. We also trained each genre on all architectures for 200 epochs, and we chose 200 epochs because, again, through past trial runs, we saw that once we hit the 200 mark, we weren't really seeing a big increase in accuracy, so we thought that was a good stopping point. In the next slide, we can see a more detailed visualization of each of the architectures. So the first one has 2 LSTM layers with an attention layer. So the purpose of an attention layer is to add weights to parts of the input sequence that are relevant to what we're looking for. So in our case, music generation, and this is supposed to help with model performance. In the next one, we have 3 LSTM layers with 2 dropout layers. And we wanted to include dropout layers because we didn't want overfitting to happen in our music. We wanted our music to sound more original. In the next one, we have our one LSTM layer, which is the most simple model by far. And we decided to include this because we wanted to see if the complexity of our model impacts the quality of our music at the end. And finally, we have our bidirectional LSTM layer, which of course has a bidirectional layer. And the way a bidirectional layer works is by duplicating a recurrent layer so that there are two layers side by side. It then passes in a copy of the input sequence into one of them and a reversed copy of the same input sequence into another layer. And this is supposed to, again, help with model performance. And we paired this with dropout layers as well. So one thing we kept constant throughout all four architectures were the dropout layers because we really wanted to decrease the occurrence of overfitting in our music. So next I'll pass it on to Nick to talk about our model output.
All right. So as far as training the models actually went, we trained all four models for the four genres, and we selected the two best models out of each genre. So out of the models that we actually looked at, we went to maximize accuracy and minimize training loss. That's the goal of basically what we're trying to train. So across the board, we noticed some trends actually. We noticed that simpler models like the one LSTM layer model for like the Schumann, anime, and jazz pieces actually had the highest accuracy and lowest loss. Meanwhile, more complex models did not really succeed in this, as the alternative model is also usually the attention layer LSTM. The only dataset that this was unique for actually was the Chopin dataset, in which the best model is the 3 LSTM layer model. And that also had the lowest loss across all of the models. So now we get to model output. So the objective of this project is to actually generate music, right? So how do we go about doing that? In terms of generating music, we have to give our model an input sequence so it can actually predict notes based off of that input sequence and generate them. So in the figure shown below, we actually took an excerpt from the anime dataset and used it as an input sequence. And using this input sequence, we fed it to our model and asked it to generate notes based on that. And that's shown after the orange line of the figure. So we decided that maybe loss and accuracy are probably not the best metrics to judge the musicality of different songs. So we decided to conduct a survey on 41 different participants on 8 video clips. These 8 video clips were the 2 best models from each genre, as shown in the previous table. And we had them in an assortment playlist in which the participants did not know if they were of what genre or what model. And we had them rank them 1 through 4. So the results of that survey actually are shown in this graph right here. So in terms of weighted votes, the alternative model for the anime genre succeeded, and this was the attention layer model for the anime genre, with pulling in 108 weighted votes. Meanwhile, for Schumann, it came in as a close second and pulled in 102 votes. Every other genre was pretty much stagnant, to be honest, as it did not pull in nearly as many votes as these two. And the other chart shows the model selection based on first place votes, in which Schumann actually won pretty handedly, and anime came in close second again. So now we wanted to show you some of our audio clips, and this is of our best model as ranked by the survey participants. And now this is from the Schumann model. Now I'll pass it on to Daniel to conclude.
All right, yeah. So after all this, to come to conclusion, we have found that a simple LSTM models are very much capable of generating modern music, such as anime pop music, on par with their classically trained counterparts. Particularly with jazz, we didn't see great results, but that is to be expected with how intricate jazz is, and it's probably hard for humans to pick up on the harmonies and rhythms going on there. So of course it would be hard for a statistical model too. And then back to what Kirti was saying earlier with our attention layers, we experimented with attention layers to try and help our models contextualize patterns a little better instead of focusing so much on the sequential nature of music. But this kind of led to mixed outputs both in training and in our survey. And then, of course, last, we have model architectures which are larger. The more complex models do not necessarily train better and produce better output from our models here. And then, moving on for our future work in music generation, we of course would want to reduce more overfitting, try and get those melodies out of our generation as much as possible. And we do that through dropout layers and larger data sets. And then another thing we talked about was introducing more elements into our music vectors, such as time step, so we could have a better unmapping function. And so it could, our MIDI files that are created are much more true to which they actually are. And last but not least, we talked about this a little bit at the end, a fun little, another project to have on top of this, and that is lyric generation, because LSTMs are very successful in natural language processing and generating text. So that could be something fun to play around with. Yeah, and that kind of wraps everything up. So are there any questions?
I have a question actually to both teams. How did you all distribute the work? I mean, it's a multiple teams, right? So who did what and what were some of the challenges? And I'd like to ask this question, if that's okay, Ryan, to the earlier team as well.
Yeah, so particularly in our case, music generation, since we were training their models, all our pre-processing had to get done before we started training. And so this kind of led to a linear workflow, right? We couldn't really split up the work as well. So it was a lot of collaborative, all at one time, working on our pre-processing and all that kind of stuff. And then we, would split up and work on it and come back together. And yeah, that kind of thing. It wasn't, that's how we divided up the work.
Okay, thank you. And also the earlier team, if you could please answer that question for me. The heat maps, Can
you all hear me now? Am I coming through?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so the way we went about it, we had our timeline there, but the way that we split up the work mainly is that there was a lot of theoretical issues that came about with trying to define where people are looking. So there was a lot of going into like other papers by MIT. So we had a couple people working on that and telling the coding section of our team to really figure out like the implementation part for the heat maps, like where or how big should we make our ellipses? How hot should we make the center? Questions like that. Should it be equal for all the users? So we kind of worked together for that on the heat map part. And then once we got to resolution maps and compression, we had a team working on that while another team worked on the machine learning model, because we kind of had to split up, distribute that in order to make it in time. But that was basically how we split up the work there.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Dr. Cole, do you have a question for the music generation team before we move on?
Very quick then.
Yeah.
What was your implementation language?
Python.
Python, okay. And did it generate a score, or did it generate the actual music, or you fed the score through MIDI?
What we do is our LSTM network, we go into detail, so just a little bit. Our LSTM network takes in input of 64, we call it time steps, which are basically 64 notes from the MIDI file that we put into the model, and the output is a single note. And our model goes linearly, and it reads 64 inputs at a time, and inputs one at a time. So we get to set the number of outputs that we'd like. And by doing this, we output another MIDI file, and we use a sound font to translate that into music that you just heard.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Sure.
Awesome. That's all the questions we have. Thank you, music generation team. Everyone, let's give them some claps. Woo! Okay, next up we have the COVID-19 genetic analysis team.
Okay, let's kick this presentation off then. Hello, fellow peers, team leads, and judges. Hope you all are doing well. I'm Shreya.
I'm Rushi.
I'm Divya.
And I'm Ariba. And we're the COVID genetic analysis team, led by Bryant and advised by Dr. Cheetah. As we all know, what was innocently supposed to be a 2-week-long spring break has turned into a 1.5-year-long pandemic, which has affected many individuals and completely changed the way the world functions. The development of a vaccine for this virus has been streamlined more than any other because of how rapidly it was spreading. As with any virus, the SARS-CoV-2 virus has also mutated into multiple variants. Our project attempts to help scientists develop future vaccines by comparing all discovered variants of a virus and finding similarities between the newly discovered ones and the most prolific strands. Our project also aims to assist public health officials target specific strains of any virus and further develop preventative measures. The spike protein on COVID serves as the initial attachment site where the virus infects a cell. The vaccine utilizes this marker by delivering the mRNA for these spike proteins into our cells, instructing our cells to develop their own spike proteins. This allows our cells to disguise themselves as the COVID-19 virus, so that our immune system can develop a response to it. The shape of this marker dictates how well the vaccine works and is instrumental in determining how well it's going to work against any variants. Hence, in our project, we only examine the coding region for the spike protein instead of the whole genome. Then we compare these regions to find the variants in spike protein and hence an infection and vaccine resistance. Our main goal for this project is to find a more efficient way to compare multiple variants of COVID and find the amount of similarity between them. Although there are already genetic comparison software capable of achieving this goal, they require a significant amount of time, energy, and power to produce the results. Additionally, human analysis of phylogenetic trees is also required in order to confirm the results produced by these software. Our algorithm attempts to produce the same results, except in a much shorter period of time and without much human analysis. For the multiple COVID-19 variants, the Wuhan strand and the UK strand have come to be the most significant ones. The Wuhan strand, represented by the red region on this image to the right, is the original strand that instigated this pandemic and was chosen since all other strains mutated from it. Additionally, the mRNA vaccine is based on the Wuhan strain. So it is a crucial variable to compare all variables against, since all variants against, as we will be determining vaccine resistance. The UK strand and its mutations, represented by the blue regions, was chosen since it took over the Wuhan strand very quickly and is currently the dominant strain. Now, Ariba will talk about MEGA.
Thanks, Shreya. So MEGA, or Molecular Evolutionary Genetic Analysis, is a software used to automatically align sequences and create phylogenetic trees for analysis of ancestry and similarity of different species. We used this software to create a phylogenetic tree of around 200 COVID sequences so that we could extract the clusters that it generates and use them as our true benchmark dataset to compare our clustering results of the same sequences with. This graphic shows how phylogenetic trees are structured, with the root on the left leading to species with common ancestors over time. This is an example of a family tree of around 3,500 sequences that visualizes how the sequences are related. And here is the phylogenetic tree that we generated using MEGA of around 200 sequences of the virus sampled from 6 continents over 12 months. We gathered this much data to ensure representation from each geographic region in each month at least 3 times. Now Divya will talk about the clustering algorithms we used.
Divya, you're muted.
Sorry. First, I'll explain how to interpret our plots. This graph illustrates how our data can be interpreted. We use multiple clustering methods to plot COVID variants against the Wuhan and UK strains, dividing the graph into 4 distinct regions. The higher up a point is on the y-axis, the more similar it is to UK strain, and the farther to the right it is on the x-axis, the more similar it is to the Wuhan strain. One of the clustering methods that we use is agglomerative clustering, which is a hierarchical clustering method that follows a bottom-up approach. Each data point starts in its own cluster, and pairs of clusters are merged as one moves up the hierarchy. This results in a true representation of the data points. We use agglomerative clustering because its hierarchical clustering method is easy to use and understand, and it produces a dendrogram, which can be easily compared to MEGA's phylogenetic tree. The base distance metric we use is Levenstein distance metric. Levenstein is a metric to measure how far apart 2 sequences of words are. In other words, it measures the minimum number of edits that you need to get from one word to another word. These edits can be insertions, deletions, or substitutions. On top of the base Levenstein distance metric, we use L1 affinity and Euclidean affinity. These are the scatter plots that we got for agglomerative clustering. As you can see, points that are further high up on the y-axis are closer to the UK strain, and points that are further along on the x-axis are closer to the Wuhan strain. And this is a dendrogram, which is a diagram that shows the hierarchical relationship between objects. The height of a branch between 2 points indicates how similar or different they are from each other. The greater the height, the greater the difference. K-means is another clustering method that we used. It's a method that groups points based on their distance from a centroid. We used it because it is the least computationally heavy and one of the simplest clustering algorithms. The distance metric that we used is the Levenstein distance metric. These are the scatter plots that we got for k-means clustering. One of the drawbacks of k-means was that all of our sequences had to be of the same length, which meant we needed to do different pre-processing for k-means compared to agglomerative clustering. And this is our dendrogram for k-means. And now on to Ariba for data analysis.
So to test the accuracy of our clusters as compared to the clusters generated by Mega, we use the accuracy score metric provided by scikit-learn. This method uses the predicted labels and true labels as inputs and does a one-to-one comparison of each object to see if the labels match. The diagram on the left shows the different buckets that the datasets can be split into, and the accuracy score is calculated by dividing the sum of the true positives and true negatives, which were predicted correctly by the overall dataset. The purity score is another method that we use to evaluate the quality of clustering. This diagram shows 3 clusters, each containing different amounts of classes A, B, and C. The purity score is calculated using the formula shown. The quantity P for each cluster is the fraction of the majority class in the cluster over the total number of classes in the cluster. For example, for cluster 3, P would equal 5/6 because C is the majority class. P is then multiplied by Ni/n, which is the fraction of the total number of classes in each cluster divided by the total number of classes in all clusters. In this way, the purity score allows us to see how many classes were clustered accurately and based on majority. Now on to Rushi for the conclusion.
All right, thanks, Ariba. So what do these scores actually mean? Essentially, they help us determine the reliability of our models in relation to random chance and Mega. Our best model was k-means with n equals 2 clusters, correctly identifying 134 sample sequences with an accuracy and purity score of 72.04%. For agglomerative, both L1 and Euclidean affinities perform best with n equals 3 clusters, with accuracy and purity scores significantly above the random chance and correctly identifying 101 and 99 samples, respectively. As we talked about earlier, we had 2 main criteria that we aim to meet with our methods: speed and reliability. While Mega took approximately 4 minutes to prepare a phylogenetic tree, our program performs and analyzes 9 iterations of clustering in under a minute. While this time will increase with sample size, we can safely conclude that our methods are significantly faster than Mega. Moving on to reliability, we see that our most accurate model using k-means and with 2 clusters produced results of just over 70% consistently. To put this into perspective, random chance, the average accuracy would be around 50%. While this model worked well, our agglomerative clustering results showed opportunity for improvement, namely because of 2 reasons. 1, we used a 2-step calculation method that may have squared any of our initial error. And 2, we used a generic string comparison metric when comparing our sequences. While it seems that there's no strong conclusion to be made from our preliminary testing, we strongly believe that there's promise to this methodology. We plan on improving clustering by focusing on the distance metric that we use. This serves as the base of our results, and utilizing gene-specific GD metrics that take into consideration the parameters of genetic language, patterns in mutations, and the significance of location in those mutations will greatly increase the reliability of our models. Ideally, this can take us to a stage where we can predict vaccine efficacy, resistance, and much more, not only for COVID, but other rapidly mutating viruses as well. Thank you. Any questions?
I have 2 questions. One is the same question I asked others, right? How did you divide up the work? And what are the future plans, especially, I mean, okay, so the reason I'm asking this question also because COVID is in our minds all the time, right? So what are the future plans? There are variants and there's, all these mutations. So what do you think could be done for that? So those are my 2 questions.
Yeah, so I'll answer your second question first, actually,
Yes.
just about future plans. So like you said, as we all know, COVID is on all of our minds, right? And the main holistic goal that we aim to achieve with our tool is to give public health officials something that they can look at to determine which strains they need to focus on first, because the world is quite large, and with COVID affecting such a vast majority of people, the strains that pop up is also very vast. So like this kind of helps give them a tool to predict which geographical locations containing specific strands they should focus on and contain, and which ones maybe they can let go, or like the vaccine can prevent, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm. Okay, and the other question was the work. How did you all divide the work?
Yeah, so what we did was we had two quotes, like labels that we had as research lead and then coding lead. And essentially what this was, that we had two people who focused on doing the biology aspect of this project, is like understanding COVID and how the vaccine works and how like the molecular biology behind the project, and two people focused on coding. So the two people who did coding would research the clustering methods that we could use, the distance metrics that we could use. And then we came together to see how we could apply those methods on the biology of COVID and see how we could produce a uniform and cohesive result.
Okay, good. Thank you. And Ryan, I've got some suggestions for all the teams later on, some things that they could do. So I'll keep that till the end, okay?
Awesome. Feel free to let me know. Looks like that's all the questions we have. Thank you, COVID-19 genetic analysis team. Woo! Awesome.
Nice. Everyone, all three teams, yeah, so far. And we'll see the next three teams.
Awesome. So the next team to go up is the portfolio comparison team. Woo! Taya, you are muted.
Sorry about that, everyone. Okay, well, good evening. My name is Taisia Ternenko, and these are my teammates, Travis Dula, Abby East, and Seon Rath, and we are the online portfolio selection team. For many of my peers and I, we've all recently been forced to broaden our knowledge of the stock market in fear of missing out on all of the wonderful GameStop memes. And the more we researched, the more we realized there's a lot of nuance to this conversation. Today, we'll be presenting some of our findings on online portfolio selection, starting first with some problem setting before we go into our 4 key strategies, the implementation we used, our results, and finally, our future work. Starting first with Abby. Right, so a lot of us have a pretty general idea of how the stock market works, right? Like you put in a certain amount of money into a few stocks and then you just wait and hope that they give you money back, right? However, if you work somewhere like Wall Street or for hedge funds, you actually want to maximize the amount of money that you get back, right? You don't want to waste any money on things that you're not certain of. And this is where a problem called online portfolio selection comes in. Online portfolio selection aims to optimize the allocation of wealth across a set of assets by sequentially selecting a portfolio. So it's trying to maximize the amount of money that you get from your portfolio. And different strategies or different approaches to solving this problem allocate wealth differently to different assets in your portfolio, but they all share the same goal of maximizing your return. As you can see here, online portfolio selection strategies share a basic framework for their algorithm. So basically, first you're going to choose your portfolio, which means you're going to choose the stocks or assets that you want to put your money into. And then throughout the trading period, your strategies are going to update the amount of money that you put into each stock differently, with the hopes of putting the most money into things that will make you the most money. And this is a concept called wealth allocation. So as you can see in the bottom left bar graph, it shows the way that money is split into 2 different strategies. So the first one and the second one both have the same amount of money into each asset, which is the different color lines are the assets. And they both have the same amount of money in each one. So they start in the same place essentially. However, in the bottom right bar graph, you can see that while one strategy only changed the amount of money in each asset a little bit, the other one changed it completely and put all of the money into one, which just shows how drastically these strategies can differ. And now Travis can talk a little bit more about the strategies in particular.
So in the survey research paper that we studied, the strategies were divided into 4 main categories. And the first one is the benchmark or baseline category. And these are typically not used to invest your money with the exception of buy and hold. but these are used for comparing market performance against the performance of the strategies that you implement. And you can see an example of the cumulative return of buy and hold in the top right. The next two strategies are the following, or the next two sets are the following strategies. The first one is follow the winner, which is perhaps the most intuitive. If a stock is doing well, you simply invest more money into it. And then there's follow the loser, which works on the mean reversion principle. And the mean reversion principle states that if a stock goes down, it is expected to go back up later. You can see Omar at the bottom right is an example of that. And last is pattern matching, which is the most complicated set of strategies. It does two steps, the first of which is sample selection, where you look through historical data in your stock market and you choose a similarity set to compare to your current state. And then with that similarity set, you move into the optimization stage, where you determine how you're going to allocate wealth based on what would have been good in that past similarity set. I'll pass it on to Sayant, who will talk about our implementation.
All right, yeah, so we talked about all these wonderful strategies. Now, how do you actually implement them and get some really good results? You're going to want to maximize the variance that between each one of these strategies and their implementations. So how do you do that? You manipulate the volatility in the portfolios that you input in these strategies. So going a little bit deeper into how we manage to manipulate the volatility, or basically how responsive a strategy is to a certain stimulus that happens in the market. We basically center around two things: notable events and assets. So for notable events, we wanted to pick highly volatile time periods, such as the COVID crash, the August 2020 tech boom, and then the winter 2020 EV bubble. And then on the right, you can see some of the assets that we chose from a diverse set of industries to really give a really nice diverse portfolio to input into these strategies. Now, kind of going into the technical implementation, obviously we have the strategies themselves, which rely heavily on map libraries such as NumPy, scikit-learn, and CVXPy. But outside of that, to actually compare these things, we managed to house all those strategies inside the context of a much bigger market simulator system using Python, and a lot of those libraries that I just mentioned. And so basically, how this thing works is that all you need to do is that you need to give it CSVs. They don't need to be pre-processed or anything. You feed in the CSVs. Our data preprocessor processes them into an appropriate format in-house, and then you have a trading market object that iterates through each of these CSVs and calls strategies whenever needed. And then at the end of the trading period, there will be a visualizer that simply visualizes your cumulative return and some other factors as well. And then some really cool features about the way that we made this is that it's all extensible, which means that it uses excellent use of inheritance. And so developers can really easily make their own algorithms and test them in addition to our own package. And then we have PyTest fixtures to make sure that these algorithms are accurate. And then we support multiple data formats as evidenced by the data preprocessor. Now I'll hand it off to Ty, who will talk about results.
Thanks. So this is going to be a visualization of two strategies that start with $1 each, and then seeing as how they both use different update schemes, they end up with different cumulative returns. So going off of just this, you can see that what we first decided to do, as Sayant said, was figure out what exactly we were wanting to test over. And what we found was that stable portfolios and short-term portfolios did not give enough differentiation to be able to see the strategies at their best and be really able to determine what was going to be the most stable and the most reliable. So what we decided to do was test on volatile long-term portfolios. And what we saw overall was while the baseline strategies were very intuitive, they were very unreliable. For example, as you can see, the buy and hold strategy in blue could make you a lot of profit over a very short period of time, but it could lose it just as quickly and go down to a cumulative return that was lower than some of the other more stable strategies. So these intuitive strategies did not work out in the long term as much as we hoped they would. Then let's talk about the following categories. These were great if you had a very specific scenario happen. So if your market was on a general upswing, following the winner did give you a good profit. And if the market was on a downswing and then one stock rapidly shot back up, which is typical in a varied portfolio, follow the winner also did well. But overall, again, these were not able to match the current market needs when things were changing very rapidly. The ones that were able to do that were the pattern matching strategies. And this is because what they did was rather than focus on what had already happened and respond to it when the market was changing. They made predictions based off what was happening already. And therefore, the longer the time went on, the more predictions they were able to make and follow the market trends. Even in a volatile portfolio, you could see that there are still trends, and following them, they had very stable growth. They didn't grow as rapidly, but they still had stable growth overall. And they had less transaction costs because they didn't change how much of their portfolio distribution occurred often.
So what's next for this project? Well, like I mentioned earlier, there's a highly extensible code architecture that we made use of. And what this really lends itself to is the possibility of publishing a Python package that people in the actual industry can use and actual developers can use to actually test their own strategies on top of our implementation. Another thing that we really like to see is more flexible data processing. We already support a range of CSVs, but expanding it even more to different types of data would really take this project to the next level. And then possibly adding some other market attributes, handling features, such as stock splits, dividend reinvestments, after hours trading, and a lot of other really cool things of the market that could really bring this to real life application level. And then lastly, since we did work with so many different math principles, maybe making our own algorithm of sorts and testing it would also be really cool.
We're very thankful for the work of our lead, our faculty advisor, the graduate student who helped us with constrained optimization, and of course for the survey paper that we based our research on. And thank you all for coming, and we're ready to answer any questions if you have them.
Okay, just an observation, question first and then an observation. So you're working entirely from pricing data, true? You have CSVs like from Yahoo Finance that have pricing data?
Yeah, so we actually worked with a very diverse data set. So like we had CSVs from Yahoo Finance that had like year-long data, like closing prices. And we also work with tick level data, which models, or there's basically like a data entry for every single exchange of stocks for a certain asset. So yeah, very diverse range of data sets.
Okay, yeah.
Question?
The other observation, just to kind of clue you in on something that I learned a long time ago, I've been investing for almost 50 years, is that the only real predictor is insider purchases, insider open market purchases, which are recorded. Those are reported to the SEC. Insider sales don't tell you anything, and pricing doesn't really tell you, as you've kind of guessed, very much. But still, it's a good analysis, and it's one of several models that I've seen in a long period of time that I've been watching this. So anyway, but good analysis. Thank you.
I also had some questions, but I do not have Professor Cole's experience in investment, of course. So I had a question. So on the x-axis, you had put the number of strategy executions. So how often do you allow, so first of all, do you only allow each algorithm to trade at the same time? And also, how often do you allow algorithms to trade?
We're actually quite flexible in the way we handle this. So into our trading market simulator, we pass in the strategy, its corresponding data source, and a frequency for every strategy that we want to test. So for example, we could say buy and hold, test every 1 minute, and that'll run it fairly quickly. But then we could say we want Omar to test only every 1 day. So we can control those frequencies. And for this graph you're seeing here, it is every 24 hours because it's pretty much over the whole past year. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Also, did you guys compare against the S&P at all?
Can I ask a quick clarification question on that real quick before we go into that?
Sure, sure.
So by the S&P, like, do you mean like the overall return of the S&P, or like are you talking about like having a portfolio that tracks the S&P?
So just what would happen if you track the S&P, buy and hold from the entire duration of how you were testing these algorithms on, right?
Okay, yeah. I mean, I guess I can sort of go ahead and answer that. Well, our portfolio actually did have an ETF that did track the S&P. So in that case, yeah, we did sort of compare against the S&P. It was representative about 6 of our portfolio. But as for the actual return, I can kind of say it off the top of my head that over the past year, I think the S&P, it's fluctuated quite a bit, but normally the S&P returns you about 8% a year. And so like you can see over here, like some of these strategies, especially if you look at OMAR, kernel-based and exponential gradient, they returned about 5 to 6%, and buy and hold returned about 7%. So yeah, that's how they kind of compared against the S&P, but it's not overlaid on this chart.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I have a question. Okay, so the one question I want to find out about the work, the division of the work. But the other thing is, how do you think, I mean, there's already work going on. I know you're undergraduate students and this is great work, but what is the extra you think that your research is going to give to the traders that is not there at present?
Well, in terms of dividing up the work, what we did was, because we had so many strategies, we all chose a certain amount, and we all decided together how we would structure the market, and worked on our strategies separately, but often collaborating and just dividing up the work in a relatively even manner. And then some of us worked more on the presentation while others did the visualization towards the end. But it was a lot of collaboration.
Right. And then my second question, I'm not sort of expecting, as I said, undergraduate students. So let me rephrase the question. How do you think the traders will really benefit from your research?
Well, the good thing is we considered this in terms of our trading wouldn't necessarily affect the market. That's how the paper assumes you are trading on a sort of lower standard, or you're not a billion-dollar hedge fund. So this would be something that might be good for an everyday person to understand and to utilize, because it might give you more of a level shot at competing with those very rapidly fast trading, fast-paced hedge funds and people you just can't compete with on a basis if you don't have a graduate's degree, maybe in finance or things like that. So it's more useful to an everyday person, I would say, especially because we do have that part where you can implement your own strategies based on the way we have our inheritance set up.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, judges, for those questions. Everyone, please give it up for the portfolio comparison team. Woo! Awesome. So the next team to go up is the temporal LiDAR team.
All right, assuming everyone can see my screen. Good evening. Today, we're going to be presenting our brief overview of how we're going to be improving the utility of temporal LiDAR data when it comes to the problem space of semantic segmentation. My name is Gagan, and my teammates are Suvin, David, and Mithil, with our lead being Eric, and our advisor being Nicholas Rosie. A brief overview of what we're going to be covering over today. First, we're going to dive into what LiDAR imaging really means, some examples of how this is applicable. Then, we're going to be talking about what the semantic segmentation problem is defined as, and some existing research solutions that already solve this problem. We'll then identify failure points in existing research solutions that try to solve semantic segmentation, and propose our own novel data augmentation solution to improve the performance of semantic segmentation. We'll explain the methodology we use to test our solution, as well as evaluate the final results that our solution achieved compared to the existing industry standard.
So what is LiDAR? First, it's important to understand what LiDAR really is. LiDAR is a technology that uses laser pulses to map out the area around a sensor. As you see in the animation, the sensor spins around to collect data surrounding itself. Each full revolution of a sensor generates a point cloud, or a frame. As the sensor spins again and again over time, multiple frames are generated. This was what makes the data temporal. Now let's go through some examples of LiDAR scans from driving cars. This is a single frame taken from LiDAR sensors mounted on top of a car. Notice how the entire image is made of a ton of small points. Here we can see a collection of multiple frames stitched together to make it temporal. Although you can probably make out the road, sidewalk, and maybe even the pedestrians in the example, This task is extremely difficult for computers to do. This brings us to the semantic segmentation problem, which is the process of classifying each point depending on what object it belongs to. Traditional algorithms have a difficulty accurately classifying every single point. Therefore, we look to machine learning models that can accomplish this for us. This is what a fully segmented frame looks like. The orange represents the car, the green represents the road that you can drive on, the blue represents the walls. The machine learning model we use will be explained by Gagan.
Let's look at some existing research solutions that already solve the semantic segmentation problem. First, as Mithil said, LiDAR point clouds are unstructured and irregular, which means traditional algorithms don't really know what these points represent. Hence, researchers created something called local feature aggregation, which essentially clusters these points in groups and then tries to figure out, what this feature means. For example, cars, trees, roads, etc. One such machine learning model that uses local feature aggregation is known as RAND-LANet. And that is the model we chose for today's benchmark. But our solution going forward is not limited to this model. Here's an architecture overview of what RAND-LANet is. And someone's going to go over the three main subsections of RAND-LANet.
Thank you, Gagan. Now we're going to go over the three major architectural structures that was used to build RAND-LANet. First being local spatial coding, which finds the nearest neighboring points for each LiDAR point and clusters them together. The next one is attentive pooling, which aggregates all the different features and clusters. And last one is residual block, which just tries to retain the geometric shape of the point by further taking nearby points into account. All three of these algorithms require high point cloud density, which results in better performance. Therefore, a lower cloud density would result in a much lower segmentation accuracy. That's why only high-end expensive LiDAR scanners can produce accurate segmentations, which led us to the question of how we could make our point clouds more dense. And our solution was to merge frames over time. Our plan was to make temporal LiDAR frames denser by combining the past frames with the current ones. And we were able to do this by using an iterative closest point algorithm, which basically first just matches and syncs the two frames together into one single 3D space, then uses an IMU gyroscope information to prevent streaking. Once this pre-processing is done, then we run it through RAND-LANet to test it. One note, this solution is not dependent to any specific machine learning classification. It can be used for anything. We were just using RAND-LANet as a test. Now David will be showing you the results of merging the frames together.
Thank you, Sivan. So when it comes to merging the frames, we first overlay one frame over the other. And then in the context of the first frame, we run the iterative closest point algorithm to fuse the frames and use the IMU data for the correction of rotation and translation. Now we will see a comparison of two different scenes that visualize the point clouds before and after our pre-processing has been applied. Now, after fusing multiple frames into one, we see an increase in LiDAR point cloud density, which would then improve the accuracy of our model's clustering of points, which would then improve segmentation. And now Gagan will explain how we tested our methodology and analyze the accuracy.
In order to actually analyze how accurate our model was, we had to use the industry standard KITTI sample LiDAR data that comes pre-labeled with human test data. So humans have already gone in and labeled in what cars are, what roads are, and etc. When merging these multiple frames, we also wrote code that would merge the appropriate test data, but in a separate isolated process. Then RAND-LANet goes in and predicts on the untouched given data, as well as predicts on our pre-processed data on the second run. Once we have all the predictions, each point is then compared against the ground truth human test label data, so we know the accuracy of our solution. We also calculate the accuracy of each type of segment. So how accurate we were at car segmentation, how accurate we were at road segmentation, pedestrian segmentation, a very important part for self-driving vehicles. This prediction process does not have access to the test information, so that we make the best inferences. Here's a visualization of the segmentation before and after our pre-processing. On the left-hand side, you can clearly see how less dense the points are and how the sidewalk, the pedestrians, and the cars are not very defined from the vehicle perspective. However, on the right-hand side, after our frame merging and visualization is done, you can see qualitatively how much more dense and how much more defined the points are And this leads to better practical use cases, in this case, for self-drying labels. Moving on to results, each column represents different types of segmentation. So we calculated how accurate we were at segmenting cars, motorcycles, trucks. In this case, it was not present in the scene, and other objects. An important thing to note is that static objects such as pedestrians, traffic signs, and other standing still or slightly smaller frame objects had an object accuracy uplift of approximately 3 to 5%. And in this industry, every single percentage leads to a significant improvement in object detection. This is because of the much improved density and the different perceptions we had from the frame moving over time. Road accuracy, however, did decrease by 2.5%, and we believe that this is caused by an issue with streaking, but it's already very accurate at approximately 85%. Coming to streaking, we believe we can use this streaking in potential future improvements to improve our model through a retrained model that adapts to streaking for moving objects. We can also include the use of computer vision in order to further improve edge and geometry detection to further get better results. So what do we have here? We have developed a data augmentation technique that successfully improves the semantic segmentation of temporal LiDAR data. This makes a wider range of LiDAR sensors viable for semantic segmentation. Note that the characteristic of our solution is that static objects have improved, which means there's more practical applications such as architectural mapping, medicinal mapping, geomatics, and much more. And that concludes a brief overview of our project, and we're opening it up to questions now.
So if nobody else has you can go ahead,
Yes, I have a
Professor.
question. Yeah. First, the same question I'm asking everyone: how do you all how did you all divide the work? And also, this is it's an area that several years ago we did some work on applying. We call it data mining, but more data science to look at sort of suspicious events or something like geospatial events.
Thank you.
I'm still asking the question. Right. So.
Sorry, that was not me. I was not sure who that was.
Oh, maybe someone else. Okay. So, right. So how do you think that your research would help to sort of detect any unusual patterns sort of going on, especially with this geospatial like LiDAR data?
Yeah, absolutely. So starting off with the first question, we mainly distributed the work by splitting based on different types of models. We had initially, when coming in, this is a very open-ended project on how we're going to be improving this geospatial or segmentation, right? And so we had to split apart the models, and we evaluated each one of them independently, and we came to a consensus on what model we're going to be using benchmarking-wise, and then implemented the iterative closest point algorithm and created novel ways to improve segmentation. Now, coming to your second question on geospatial, I think that it would help in that field because we're merging. Even if we're merging existing frames with past frames, which means that even if, for example, a sensor that's doing geospatial mapping is low resolution, when you merge a current frame to a past frame, you get twice, in theory, you get twice the amount of data, and your segmentation gets much more accurate because most of these models, existing research models out there, they work based on the k-mean squared algorithm. So they take clustering of points together. And so by improving the density, theoretically and display portrayed in the data, our model improves segmentation of in a geospatial in self-driving as well as potentially in geospatial applications.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I had a quick question. So you mentioned that you drew the conclusion that your model helps with smaller objects within frames and like stationary objects, but I don't know if you can. I guess you can say that, but you mentioned that like I think the parking, like the accuracy for parking spots didn't go up or some other things. So I guess my point is like it's just a comment, but a lot of these neural network results are kind of arbitrary, and it may be hard to say exactly what aspects. Right, there are things you're trying to improve with this method, but it's hard to say what aspects you failed to or did improve in general. So.
Right. Yeah. That's a valid point. We considered that as well. Making the statement that static objects specifically are targeted would be otherwise be not exactly a strong conclusion. However, based on what we understand on how the merging works, based on the visualization of the merging, already the parts of the scene that are already moving, that are already big, like roads, like already existing sidewalks, already existing other aspects, those are already prevalent in the first frame that is not merged. However, with the visualization upon inspection, we've clearly seen that the static smaller objects that are more prone to be missed by initial LiDAR scans are much more dense and are much more visually apparent from a point perspective and a perspective, which is double time, but they're much more prevalent in that aspect. And we believe that that's the reason why static objects do actually specifically improve in performance. And we're seeing that with the merged frame once we merge it and visualize it.
Cool, yeah, thank you so much.
Awesome. Did anyone else have any more questions? Dr. Cole?
Good, thank you.
Awesome. Cool. So thank you, temporal LiDAR team. Woo! Everyone give it up. Woo!
Thank you, Ryan.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. So the last team for tonight is the historical text mining extraction team. So yes. All right, good luck.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sophie Horner, and I'm joined by Pax Gold, Pavan Govu, and Andrew Tran to talk about interpreting historical text mining, interpreting historical data using text mining extraction. And we were led in this by Abby Thomas, and we were advised by Dr. Karen Mazidi. To just start off with, natural language processing is a way for machines to learn how to read, interpret, and write human text in a human voice. They're able to do things with this that are impossible for humans to do on their own. For example, some commercial uses include things like large-scale analysis of consumer reviews and speech-to-text transcription. You can see here on the slide that search suggestions are also another example of this, where they try to predict the next words you're going to type. So NLP covers many areas, including things looking at context, topic, engrams, syntax, readability, and sentiment. And you're able to use all of these things to look at many areas. For example, social scientists want to use NLP to look at thousands of documents across a wide array of sources to gain better insight into the social landscape. We did this when we used it to look at documents from the Civil War to learn more about the different perspectives at that time. Our goal in this was to try and see some of the benefits NLP might have in this area and to see some of the advantages of having speed and consistency when compared to human readers. And now Pavan's going to talk some more about the data we used.
The documents that we analyzed in our machine learning study came from a dataset called First-Person Narratives of the American South. This is essentially a collection of about 150 different types of documents, including letters, memoirs, autobiographies, and diaries. The creators of the dataset over at the University of North Carolina intended this to be a diverse collection of authors and texts, optimized for natural language processing research. One thing to note, all the documents in the dataset are written by real people about real events. Now, in most machine learning studies, there's what's called gold standard data, which is essentially an established, verified dataset that's widely considered to be true by the experts in the given field. You would use this data and compare it against your own results to measure the accuracy or performance of the programs that you're writing. In our case, however, we didn't have any such gold standard data, so we had to generate our own using a process of annotations. First, we went through the summaries of all the documents and gathered some basic information about each one, including date of birth, table of contents, some subject headers, and whatnot. Then, in the second pass-through, we enlisted the help of some other ACM members and went through each document one by one, giving it a score in 4 categories: polarity, subjectivity, topics, and demographics. Polarity is essentially how positive, negative, or neutral the document was. Subjectivity is how opinionated or biased the author sounded. Topics is the main ideas that were presented throughout the text, and demographics is information about the author, such as their race, gender, religious affiliation, economic status, and other factors. Next up is Pax, who will talk more about the scripts themselves.
Thank you, Pavan. So we looked at 2 types of data. We looked at categorical analysis and numerical analysis. And so the first score we took was topic modeling, and topic modeling uses a latent Dirichlet allocation model, which is a machine learning model used to group similar types of data together. And for our case, we were grouping words together in clusters by proximity, relevance, and context into essentially topics. And throughout our corpus, we found 4 relevant topics: war, politics, home life, and family. We found it's more interesting to look at these differences by demographic. So here on the left, we have a cluster among white authors that we don't typically find among Black authors that is related to war and military and frontline events. And on the right, we have a cluster among Black authors that we don't typically find under white authors, which is regarding slavery. Topic modeling is really essential to try and find out the different things that people talk about. And this is a great way to see what our corpus differed in. Another way to see what people are talking about using methods that don't use machine learning are n-grams. And n-grams find common n combinations. So essentially unigrams, bigrams, and trigrams, 1-word, 2-word, and 3-word combinations. So the program works first by removing stop words such as a and the common words that we use every day. And then it keeps a running tally of the n-grams found within the text. The final results are top 20 most common and therefore most significant n-grams within the text. And here, as you can see, figure 6 is the most frequent unigrams for female authors. And I find this really interesting because you can compare the n-gram results to topic modeling results, and together you can see what different demographics are talking about. Now moving on to our numerical analysis. Oh, I'm sorry. I do want to show you these 2 figures of individual writers. We have a Black female nurse and a white male soldier. And these are the most common unigrams that they use within their text. And again, this is an excellent way to see the different things that they tend to talk about. As you can see, the white male soldier talks a lot about frontline events, and the Black female nurse talks about her work and the social landscape at the time. So the first score we took for numerical analysis is the Flesch reading each score, which ranges from 0 to 100. And 0 marks the most difficult, which is a graduate level reading, and 100 marks the easiest, which is a 5th grade level. And the formula uses average words per sentence and average syllables per word. As you can see in figure 8, our mean is 60.42, which is a pretty high score, higher than we expected, which means it's an extremely readable corpus. We did want to compare this to other text data sets, modern novels, for example, BBC Politics articles and BBC Entertainment articles. And as you can see, with the exception of modern novels, our corpus was easier to read than even BBC Entertainment articles. The last score that we took was sentiment analysis, which is split into polarity and subjectivity. Polarity is positive, neutral, and negative attitude, and subjectivity is emotional versus factual content within the text. We did find that there was very little difference across the demographics between polarity and subjectivity. Most sentences were overall rated positive or neutral, as well as within the objective ambiguous range. We did manage to find that sentences that contained words marked by the topic modeling algorithm were overall more subjective than the average score. Next, we have Andrew talking about some of our conclusion results and some of the errors we made along the way and how we could fix them.
Thank you, Pex. So through our research, we were able to gain a deeper understanding of the context behind the Civil War. One of the first things we noticed was that writing complexity was fairly standard by this time. The things that we looked at were economic status, race, and gender, and we saw how these demographics were able to write. As seen in the figure on the right, people of all economic classes all wrote at about the same level, and this trend held for the other demographics as well. Another conclusion we were able to make was that shortly after the Civil War, many Black authors focused their writings on topics such as education, religion, and family life. We attributed this to the fact that by this time, most Black people were now freed slaves, and as such, Black authors wanted to write about how to improve the standard for Black living. Now, along the way, we did have some limitations. First off, we had an inconsistent gold standard. We realized that some of us had scored the polarity inconsistently. And we also aren't historians, which means that we do lack the historian expertise in our gold standard. We also had the presence of false positives, such as sarcasm, and positive statements with negative words. For example, the sentence as shown says, "I can't wait for the war to be over," which is a positive statement, but words such as can't, wait, war, and over are negative, and our program isn't able to detect that and grades the sentence negatively. But overall, we found our research to be a success. We had started by trying to find a way to analyze and interpret a large set of historical documents, and we wanted to learn more about Civil War perspectives. We hoped that by doing all of this, we would demonstrate a potential and practical application of natural language processing. So then we started by creating our own gold standard to benchmark our efficiency, and then we developed the individual programs that scored each aspect of the annotation process. Through this, we were able to learn new perspectives based on different groups of authors during the Civil War, and we demonstrated an improved processing time with the use of natural language processing. Our team doing manual annotations took about 3 months to get through 150 documents, whereas our program was able to do it in an average of 10 minutes. Now looking to the future, we hope to obtain a better gold standard with historian expertise to better benchmark our results against, and we hope to deal with the false positives. We'd also like to be able to work with larger data sets, as in the end, we had only worked with 150 documents, whereas historians might work with upwards of 500, maybe even 1,000 documents in a given time. So that concludes our presentation. I'd like to thank everyone for their attention and time, and especially Brian and Abby who advised our project. Are there any questions?
Yes, I have a question. One is the same question I'm asking everyone, the work division. And the other is, did you all find something that sort of previously was unknown by using this sort of machine learning data science for text extraction? Or were the results expected?
So for your first question, we split up our total scripts into 4 types of scripts. Excuse me. We had topic modeling, n-grams, sentiment analysis, and the reading aids. And so all 4 of us did the research, but in the end, each person took 1 script to handle. And then together we tried to combine them and see what we could get at the end of it. For your second question, something that surprised us was that while we would rate some of these texts as negative objectively overall, the total number of negative sentences was not as different from other texts. So a text written by someone who had a very difficult life was not as negative, was not more negative than someone who had a fairly nice life at the time.
Okay, that's very good. And just a general sort of comment to Ryan. It was excellent presentations, Ryan. So my question is there some place that the students can publish their research or something that they can do? You know, because it's such good work and I really don't want it to go unnoticed. So I don't know what we can do. Is there a special web page that you can create and put all these presentations in there for the ACM competitions? You know, because it is some useful research that people can take advantage of, other students, and build on this.
Definitely. I have
so like a project, and this is something for John also, like a project wiki, some project page or something for this whole initiative, like a hub where you can start with last year's, even if you don't have last year's, but at least start with this year and start populating, but sort of professionally done.
That should go on the main ACM website at the very least, or linked on the ACM website for sure.
Yeah, when you say main ACM website, are you talking about acm.org or UTD's website?
UTD.
Okay, okay.
For starters.
Right. So this is really good, and I really like to brag to them because, as I was mentioning to Ryan, I'm an ACM fellow and work very closely with ACM when I say that ACM, the headquarters, and various people there. So I really like to brag about, not, I don't want to use the word, but I really want to publicize this great stuff that's going on at UTD, and then have a link where people can all look at it. So send it to my, we all meet like almost every Thursday in the morning, with our special subcommittee as well as part of the entire committee. And so this will be very, very useful for UT Dallas that we are doing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thurisingham, for the suggestion. Actually, I haven't thought about that, but we'll definitely look into it.
Yeah, I really like this done because it's really important, I think, for UT Dallas.
And it's impressive work. It really is. Everyone, all of you.
Yes, that's what I meant. Everyone, all the 16s. Yeah.
Yes.
I think Ryan also deserves a special shout out. He
I know, he's been just wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, he started this entire initiative on his own. Like, I think about a year ago, he came to me. He's like, he already had professors lined up and everything, and he was like, "Can I start this?" And I was a little bit hesitant, but then he showed me all the work that he'd already done. So he's just been tremendous in pushing this forward. So yeah, definitely shout out to Ryan and also all of the research officers who were leading these teams. They weren't mentioned too much, but I think they were also very important here. So I actually had a quick question for this this group. So you mentioned that you had a team of people annotating. So as I understand, are you scoring each of these articles on different by different metrics, or how does that work exactly?
So essentially what we had was, you're right, we had our team, and then we also had Ryan, Saksham, and Bryant helping out. And we'd go through each of the documents and give a polarity score. And so for instance, polarity, -1 would indicate a negative document, a 0 would indicate a neutral, and a +1 would indicate a positive toned document. And then subjectivity, same fashion. Topics was essentially the list of topics that we found. So main ideas such as war, military, some things that we found were commonly occurring throughout the text. And then demographics was more so about the author. One thing to note, for each document, there were a total of 4 people at least giving a score for those documents. So if in case, let's say one person gives a really biased score or completely misinterprets a document, it'll prevent that from completely skewing the data because there's 3 other people on that document. So we would take the collective polarity score and the collective subjectivity score, things like that, to kind of make sure that we're not thrown off by outliers.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so my question was kind of did you have to normalize scores per person, right? Because some people may interpret positive and neutral differently. But I guess you're saying that the way you did that was just by having a large set of people review each document.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Are there any more questions before we end it there, Professor Cole?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. Well, excuse me. Thank you, Historical Text Mining Extraction Team. Everybody give it up. Woo! And then let's also do one last woo for all 6 teams today. Amazing job again. So woo!
Sorry, I don't usually do woo, but I'm doing it. Woo!
Yes. Okay. So let me start sharing my screen.
Yeah.
Awesome. So that's all the presentations we have tonight. Judges, please take a couple of minutes to verify and finalize your scores. And then while we wait for the judges, so each team tonight, along with their presentation, has also created a research poster. And so had this symposium been in person, the idea was that the audience could walk around and view these posters up close after the presentations. since we're in a virtual environment, we won't be able to do that. But y'all can see the posters in our GitHub. So give me a second. I will paste that into the chat.
Ryan, I have a quick question.
Yes.
Yeah, so we don't have to save the document or anything, right? It's automatically.
Yes, it is automatic.
Okay, thank you.
The chat won't pop up on Zoom, but can someone post our GitHub, please?
Yeah, Brian's already posted
Oh,
it. So
thank you. Brian, can you also paste in the check-in link? I don't know if I see it, but so for those of you who don't know, if you attend the most ACM events this semester, you should receive a prize. So check in if you want to receive a prize. But yes, for now, I'm gonna be playing some coffee jazz music while we wait for the scores to finalize. Sorry if it's too loud. The volume is at its lowest.
So I have a quick question. What sort of music are you playing?
I just Googled morning coffee jazz on YouTube.
Okay, okay. I was thinking sort of something more, I don't know. That's fine. That's okay. Something more kind of, what's that? Celebratory, celebration. But that's okay. Any music is fine.
Oh, wait, are all the judges done? I see all the points are filled out. Is everyone done? Professor Cole, Sid, Dr. Durasingham?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay.
I'm done as well.
Awesome. Professor Cole, are you still working on your rubric?
No, I'm done.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so this is the part where I tally up the score. So everyone, you'll have to wait for me. I'm using a calculator to tally the scores, just so I don't mess up anything. Give me 1 minute. one more minute to verify the scores. I want to make sure that I calculated it correctly. Oops, wait, I just realized that I ended mute, but I got to change on the slide. I have finalized. Okay, awesome. My screen's here, right? Yes, yes. Okay, cool. So thank you, judges, for finalizing your scores. And now I'm going to announce the awards for tonight. So for tonight, we'll have one first place team, and each member of that team will receive a $25 Amazon e-gift card. Now, the criteria for judging included 5 categories: abstract, poster content, poster appearance, quality of analysis, and the presentation of research. Okay. Now, I just want to I want to say that every team did an amazing job this year. I was blown away. Okay, so the first place winner, the winner for the Spring 2021 ACM Research Symposium, second edition. Can we get some drum rolls, please? Do. Okay, are y'all ready? I'm nervous. But the again, the winner of the Spring 2021 ACM Research Symposium is, okay, the winner of the ACM Research Spring 2021 Symposium is the Temporal LiDAR team. Woo! Awesome job. Now, don't be discouraged if your team didn't win. Everyone
is a winner, okay? Everyone is a winner.
Yes, everyone is a winner. But yes, that concludes the second edition of the ACM Research Symposium. Thank you to our judges, Professor Cole, Dr. Dursingham, and Sid for helping out. And a very special thank you to all of our faculty advisors, Dr. Prakash, Dr. Cheetah, Dr. Mazidi, Dr. Ruozi, Dr. DeGroat, and Dr. Gupta. To the audience, thank you for coming out. We hope you enjoyed this symposium and what all the teams presented. Again, I highly encourage y'all to see each team's posters, which is in our GitHub. But yes, have a great night, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Good night. Thank you. And well done, students, everyone. Great. Thank you, Ryan.